Welcome to this week's Know Your Foe. As the Wildcats come back from their bye week at 3-6, they'll be taking on the 4-5, I should say, Houston Cougars. Joining me today is Joseph Duarte from the Houston Chronicle. Joseph, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on.
Joseph, listen, Houston was picked to be basically a bottom dweller, and in some respects, they're not exactly the far removed from that, but they are winners of 2 straight, winners of 3 out of their last 4 after starting off 1-4 on the season, and they are looking at a potential opportunity to get to a bowl game, which is something that I don't think a lot of us would have predicted before the season. What happened in Houston? What has led to this huge turnaround all of a sudden?
Yeah, bowl talk wasn't on the menu to begin the year, and then when they got off to the 1-4 start, it definitely didn't look like it was going that way. But to answer your question, fourth quarter comebacks. That's kind of been the story of the last 2 games. They've had a last-second field goal to beat Utah, and then coming out of before the open week, they got a big run from quarterback Zeon Chris and stunned Kansas State 24-19. So they're, the old adage, they're winning ugly. I mean, this is not a really good offense by any stretch, but they pulled out 2 big wins, and you get these next 2 because let's face it, BYU is probably going to be tough to end the year. But if you can win against Arizona and Baylor, I mean, 6 wins in Willie Fritz's first season would be a huge accomplishment.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the offenses for both teams, for lack of a better word, have definitely been on the fritz. But the defense for Houston has not. Houston is the top 5 defense in the Big 12. Both teams are bottom dwellers, the worst 2 teams in terms of offense. But as you pointed out, Houston has been good, but not great. They've just been good enough on offense to get the job done. And that defense is really what's held them in that. Would you agree?
On offense, they've had to, they switched quarterbacks just right after Big 12 play. They went from Donovan Smith, who had been the starter for probably the last 17 games or so, and went with a more mobile type quarterback as Zeon Chris. But the big story has been what the defense has provided them. In these 2 wins, they've come up with some huge turnovers and takeaways late in the game. But for the most part, you look at the balance. I think they're like 130th and scoring offense, and they're like in the low 20s in scoring defense. I mean, it turns out it keeps you in some games, but it also buys your offensive time. I mean, there were 2 games this year back to back. They didn't score a single point. They were shut out 2 games in a row. I think they went 9 straight quarters without any points. So, I mean, it's been taking it really the tough road to get where they're at. But they showed some signs in the last game. They're trying to open up the passing game a little bit more. Zeon Chris had a bit of a shoulder injury early on, but now that he's healthy, between his legs, what he can do that way, and then trying to open up the playbook a little bit in the passing game, they've had a little bit more success in recent weeks.
If you look at the stats and you're looking at, especially quarterback sacks, it would tell you a completely different story than what's actually happening with that Houston defense. They apply a lot of pressure to quarterbacks, and they've had so many near misses over the course of this season. What kind of approach do they take defensively? Do they blitz a lot? Are they looking to just kind of force a lot of pressure with their front 4? What kind of scheme can we expect as Wildcat fans watching Houston this week?
They like to bring the blitz. I mean, I don't think it's a all out 75% of the time type blitzing team, but they have 2 position called the dog position off the edge. Keith Cooper Jr. He's a transfer from Tulane. He's probably one of their better pro prospects. He's a guy that provides some of that pressure off the edge, and then they like Michael Baden and Jamal Morse at that linebacker spot. Those are 2 guys that they sometimes bring up the middle and have the pressure. But really overall, it's sort of a balanced type defense on what they like to do. The biggest improvement has been in the secondary. I mean, last year in Dana Holgerson's last year, they were burned repeatedly for big plays. They have got in front of a lot of plays. The tackling's been a little spotty. They had a lot of missed tackles, but they haven't resulted in these huge chunk of yards, and that's been the difference where, rather than a 50-yard play that gets broken off, maybe it's a 8 or 9-yard play, and then you force a teammate to punt the ball. So they've been able to limit the explosives and get the pressure when they can. But you're right, the sacks may not show it on paper, but they do get quite a bit of pressure on the quarterbacks.
Willie Fritz is, he spent 8 seasons over at Tulane. Now he's moved over to Houston, trying to, really develop a beleaguering program. What has been your impression of how he's tried to build this thing, and really how much traction do you feel like he's gained over the course of the last month based on the good football that Houston's been able to play?
Well, he inherited a complete mess. I mean, there was so much going on, and Dana Holgorsen had the one good year where they made it to the American Championship game, but between the lack of success on the field, they pretty much thrown in the towel in the past recruiting cycle. That the school had to make a change. It was a $14+ million buyout that they had to do, but to bring in someone like Willie Fritz, the guy's been a proven winner every level. Had never had that Power 5 opportunity until now. He had won at the JUCO, the Division II, the FCS, down the list. And he came in immediately, and I know the word is used a lot, but the culture just shifted in this place where guys bought in. They knew that his track record spoke for itself, and everything that he's done has just been a complete turnaround from what they're used to doing. Even the little things that they do in practice, his involvement on the field in practice. I've never seen a 65-ish type guy with as much energy as Willie Fritz does. Now, Kelvin Sampson would give him a run for his money in basketball, but Willie Fritz is so involved. It's incredible to watch how they conduct practices, and it's all added up. They've got a great recruiting class this cycle, and then next year they've already landed a couple of big recruits. So he's just getting started. So that's why if they can get to 6 wins, it's just a cherry on top. If they don't, it's still a success, because this program is certainly trending in the right direction. And if you look at the rest of the Big 12, if BYU can do it in its second year, I think that gives a lot of hope for the other ones that this is a different looking league now, and there's a lot of parity.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Listen, the parity in this conference is evident, especially when you look at the top 4 out of the 5 teams in the preseason predictions versus where they're actually at now, with Utah, Oklahoma State, Arizona, all kind of bottom feeders, and everybody else kind of rising to the top. And your Cougars are definitely one of them. Joseph Duarte from the Houston Chronicle, thank you so much for taking some time. Before you do go, we got to get a prediction. What do you think is going to happen in Tucson?
Well, I think it's 24-20 Houston. It's going to be low scoring.
Okay, interesting. All right. Well, we'll see if he's correct on Friday. That game tipping off at 7 or kicking off at 7 o'clock. We'll get to basketball a little later down the season. But Joseph, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Joseph.